What if we told you that behind the wholesome charm of Leave It to Beaver, one of America's most iconic family shows, there was a hidden tension no one ever expected? On screen, it was all perfect smiles, life lessons, and warm family moments, but behind the scenes, a quiet storm was brewing. Hugh Beaumont, celebrated as America's favorite TV dad, carried more than just the weight of a script. Off-camera, he struggled with personal grief, unspoken resentment, and a growing emotional gap from his on-screen son, Tony Dow. Their relationship, so genuine on screen, masked a disconnect that was very real. Why did Hugh keep Tony at a distance? What happened behind the curtain of one of television's most beloved shows? Before he was Ward Cleaver, Hugh Beaumont lived a life far different than the composed father figure we thought we knew, and once you understand who he really was, everything starts to make sense. He truly was a different man when the cameras stopped rolling, and once you understand who he was behind the scenes, the quiet tension between Hugh Beaumont and Tony Dow begins to make sense. Hugh Beaumont wasn't your typical Hollywood actor. He never chased the spotlight, and acting wasn't even his original path. His story began far from the glitz of television studios, in the modest town of Eudora, Kansas. Born on February 16, 1909, Hugh was raised in a strict, deeply religious household where discipline, faith, and quiet responsibility shaped his every move. That solid Midwestern foundation stayed with him even as his family moved westward, finally settling in California. Through every transition, Hugh remained introspective, reserved, and fiercely private, a young man who stood apart from the crowd, not for showmanship, but for his serious nature and grounded values. After high school, while other aspiring stars rushed toward Hollywood, Hugh enrolled at the University of Southern California, not for acting, but to study theology. And that one decision reveals more about the man than any role he would ever play. Before Hugh Beaumont ever stepped onto a soundstage, he was preparing for the pulpit. That's right, he earned a degree in theology and became an ordained Methodist minister, delivering heartfelt sermons and serving his community with quiet conviction. So how did a man of the cloth become a fixture in millions of American living rooms? It began in the late 1930s, when Beaumont, armed with a steady voice and commanding presence, found unexpected work in voiceover and acting. Hollywood took notice. His deep, no-nonsense tone made him a natural fit for roles demanding quiet strength or moral weight. Throughout the 1940s, Beaumont built a reputation, not as a celebrity, but as a dependable presence on screen, often cast as lawmen, private detectives, or principled figures. He even took on the role of Detective Michael Shane in a string of gritty, low-budget crime films. But even with over 100 credits to his name before Leave It to Beaver, Hugh Beaumont remained an outsider in Hollywood's glitzy circles, a man of faith navigating an industry built on illusion. And that unique contrast would define both his success, and his most complicated working relationships. He didn't go out much, chase the spotlight, or do many interviews. He saw acting as a job that helped him support his family, not something that defined him. In fact, when he wasn't acting, he often went back to preaching, and he even worked as a lay minister. Like many men of his generation, Hugh Beaumont served his country in World War II. He was drafted into the U.S. Army and was a medical corps officer. While details about his specific duties are scarce, his job put him close to wounded soldiers and in the middle of real human suffering. He was quiet and serious, and each experience made him more focused and more aware of how fragile life could be. But Burton had strong opinions and a clear sense of what was right and wrong, but he rarely said them out loud on set. He expected everyone else to be the same, which didn't always win him friends but did earn him respect from some of his peers. But not everyone got along with him. His quiet nature could come across as cold, especially to younger actors who didn't understand. Television viewers thought Hugh Beaumont was the perfect dad, but behind the scenes he was much more complicated. He was a man who took life seriously, believed deeply in duty and discipline, and rarely put up with behavior he thought was immature or irresponsible. These traits would eventually cause problems, especially on the set of Leave It to Beaver, where Beaumont's strong sense of professionalism clashed with the lighter mood of some co-stars. But how did Leave It to Beaver come to be, and how did Hugh Beaumont get the part that would forever define him in the eyes of American television viewers? Leave It to Beaver was born in the golden age of television, and few shows captured the American imagination quite like it. It was clean, funny, and incredibly relatable. But what many viewers don't know is that the show almost looked very different, and Hugh Beaumont wasn't even the first choice to play Ward Clever. There were two veteran TV writers, Joe Connolly and Bob Mosher, who came up with the idea for Leave It to Beaver. They wanted to make something based on real childhood experiences. They wanted to tell stories from a child's point of view without making the kid a smartass or a cartoon. Instead, they wanted to make the kid just an ordinary kid growing up in post-war America. A lot of the ideas for the show came from Connie's own family and the things they did. Reportedly wrote down what his kids said and did, including real conversations, problems, and feelings, and that's exactly what they used in the script. The show's pilot aired in 1957 under the name It's a Small World, but not everything was set in stone yet. For example, Hugh Beaumont wasn't playing the father figure Ward Clever. Instead, another actor named Max Showalter played the part. Showalter was a talented actor who brought a more upbeat and animated energy to it, but the network didn't like how he played it. Wasn't completely happy. They wanted someone who seemed more real and could be the family's moral compass without making it feel forced. That's when Hugh Beaumont came along. When Beaumont was recast as Ward Clever, the show's dynamic changed. His calm, no-nonsense attitude gave the Clever family a steady center. His style was subtle but commanding. He didn't raise his voice unless he meant it, and he didn't give advice unless it mattered, which was exactly what the role needed. With Beaumont on board, the rest of. After the cast was decided, Barbara Billingsley played June Clever, the perfect TV mom complete with pearls and perfect posture. She brought warmth and polish to the show. Next, Jerry Matz played the show's star, Theodore Beaver Cleaver. Maters was chosen because of his authenticity, and his honest, unpolished charm became the heart of the show. Finally, Tony Dow played Wally Clever. Before being cast as Wally Clever, Dow was a successful swimmer and athlete. Dow had never been to a movie set, but producers liked the way he looked and acted. He was clean-cut, likable, and effortlessly cool, everything a teenage older brother should be. What made Dow so good on screen was his naturalism. He didn't try too hard or seem like he was acting, he just had an easygoing way about him, and people loved the way he and Mathers worked together. Wally and Beaver felt like real siblings in large part because of the chemistry between Matz and Dow. He quickly became a teen idol because he was nice and charming in public, and young people really connected with his performances. His character wasn't perfect, he got into trouble, messed up with girls, and fought with his brother, but he always had a good heart. In many ways, Wally Clever became a symbol of the perfect American boy. He was responsible, respectful, and relatable. But while the chemistry on screen seemed natural, the feelings behind the curtain were more complicated as the show's popularity grew and the cast became more. Those tensions didn't go away, instead, they slowly built up and started to change the mood on set in ways that few people outside of the production knew about. What began as a picture-perfect American family show was actually hiding small but growing tensions, and Hugh Beaumont, who was always calm in public, may have been carrying a lot more than the audience knew. For a show that looked so polished on screen, Leave It to Beaver may have had a rough road behind the scenes. A spotless portrayal of American family life, but the production itself was full of quiet drama, strange mistakes, and high expectations, especially for the young actors. Hugh Beaumont's strict standards and stern personality made the workplace difficult for some people. But there was already controversy before the show even started. One of the first and strangest issues involved a toilet tank in an airplane. In an episode of the show, there was a brief shot of a bathroom scene that showed the toilet tank. Surprisingly, this caused a lot of controversy at the time. In the 1950s, showing a toilet on TV was seen as rude, even if it was just the tank and not the bowl. Network executives were really upset, and there were serious talks about pulling the episode altogether. Standards and practices teams argued over whether the scene violated broadcast decency rules. It seems silly now, but that was a different time. Even the mention of bodily functions was enough to start a scandal. Eventually, the episode aired, but the controversy lingered. It showed that even a show as innocent as Leave It to Beaver could be affected by industry pressures and old-fashioned social norms. But that wasn't the only problem the show had, it also had trouble with ratings. Even though the show had a great idea and good acting, it didn't do well in its first season on CBS, so the network decided to cancel it. The show wasn't getting the viewers they wanted, and it looked like the Cleavers would be gone after one season. But ABC saw potential and picked it up, giving it a second chance. This time, with a new network behind it and a growing fan base, Leave It to Beaver finally found its rhythm. Viewers connected with its sincerity, parents liked its lessons, kids liked how real the characters felt, and over time, it became one of the most beloved family sitcoms of its generation. Still, the production wasn't perfect. If you look closely, you can see a lot of mistakes. There are scenes where props move around randomly between cuts, actors look into the camera by accident, and microphones dip into the frame. There were also a lot of continuity errors. A lot of this was due to budget constraints. The show was filmed quickly and efficiently, with little time for reshoots or fancy corrections. The sets were simple enough to give the impression of a middle-class home. There wasn't much depth, there weren't many camera angles, and the lighting stayed flat to save time. It was a cheap TV show, even if it didn't always look like it. Despite these problems, the cast had to perform perfectly, and that's where Hugh Beaumont's personality came into play. By all accounts, Beaumont took his work very seriously. He wasn't interested in pranks or casual attitudes. Acting was a job that required focus and professionalism. He showed up on time, knew his lines, and for adult co-stars like Barbara Billingsley, this wasn't a problem because she was just as dedicated and admired Beaumont's work ethic. But for the younger actors, especially Jerry Mathers and Tony Dow, the strict environment could be hard to deal with. This wasn't always a bad thing because Beaumont's way of running the show kept it running smoothly, scripts were followed, deadlines were met, and performances were consistent, but it also meant that Leave It to Beaver didn't have the warm fuzzy feelings that other shows did. Behind the scenes, the show about childhood didn't always feel very child-friendly, which had a big effect on how the cast members interacted with each other. But the pressure of keeping up that idealized image eventually got to Hugh Beaumont. While he kept his cool in front of the camera, his personal life was much more complicated, and the longer the show ran, the more those problems affected him physically, emotionally, and professionally. The public saw a calm, confident father figure, but as the seasons went by, the crew saw a man holding a lot together. Hugh Beaumont's personal life was anything but calm. In fact, as the years went by, the emotional stress he carried started to weigh heavily on him and those around him, especially on the Leave It to Beaver set. What many people didn't know at the time, and still don't fully understand today, is that behind his calm, fatherly presence, Hugh Beaumont was privately grieving, struggling, and slowly falling apart. One of the worst events in his life happened in the early years of the show. It wasn't a tabloid scandal or a setback in his career, it was something deeply personal and very tragic. Beaumont had planned for his family to visit him on set, which is something many actors with kids and spouses do from time to time. But that day, unfortunately, everything went horribly wrong on the way to see him. His son, his wife, and his. They were in a terrible car accident, and his mother-in-law died from her injuries. His wife was seriously hurt. It was a completely devastating event that no one could have prepared him for. But Burton wasn't with them because he was filming, and reports from the Times say that the guilt and regret of being on set reading lines in a made-up living room while his real family was going through unimaginable trauma stuck with him for a long time. People who knew him well later said that he felt bad that the show kept him away from that tragic event, and he carried that sadness with him for years. He kept his pain mostly to himself and never spoke out about the crash, but those who worked closely with him noticed a change in his behavior. He became quieter and his already serious demeanor got heavier. He wasn't just playing a man burdened by responsibility anymore, he had become one. It's hard to overstate the emotional toll this event had on him. Losing a loved one, seeing his wife get hurt, and almost losing his son were not quick healing wounds. Instead, they left lasting scars. Even though Beaumont continued to go to work, learn his lines, and play the perfect American dad, something was different beneath the surface. The warmth he showed in his scenes didn't always extend beyond the camera, and while most people still saw Ward Cleaver, some of his co-workers started to sense that they were working with a man who was. After being emotionally drained for years, Hugh Beaumont's personal life went through another breakup. In 1942, he married fellow actor Katherine Adams. Adams had been in a number of movies before quitting acting to focus on family life. The couple had 3 children and were together for more than 30 years. In 1974, they quietly divorced. The reasons for the divorce were never made public, but the split was another emotional setback for Beaumont, who valued privacy, family, and morals. The end of his marriage was a deeply personal loss. He didn't talk about it, and it wasn't in the entertainment news, but it was another reminder that the clean home life of Leave It to Beaver had little to do with his own. Later reports said that Beaumont never really found peace, neither in his personal life nor in his professional life. One of the biggest struggles he had throughout his career was a spiritual conflict between his religious beliefs and the Hollywood lifestyle. Monty wasn't just a character flaw or something to get attention, he was a real Methodist minister who studied theology, preached sermons, and tried to live a life based on his faith. Hollywood, on the other hand, was built on image, ego, and sometimes moral compromise, while many actors embraced the industry's indulgent culture. Monty kept his distance, and while he was always called private, some insiders thought it was more than that and that he was uncomfortable with them. There was always a tension between faith and fame, between values and vanity. But Burton stuck to his work and didn't try to become famous or get attention. He didn't talk about his family in interviews and kept his personal thoughts to himself. To some, he seemed cold, but others saw it as a man trying to hold on to what he believed in while dealing with a system that didn't make it easy. This is where his relationship with Tony Dow got more complicated on screen. Hugh Beaumont and Tony Dow played the perfect father and son on TV, but their real-life relationships were very different. Was the tension between them jealousy, an ego clash, or just a misunderstanding? By the time the first season of Leave It to Beaver was filming, Beaumont was in his 40s, a former theology student, a husband, a father, and a deeply principled man with strict routines and expectations. Dow, on the other hand, was just a teenager new to acting, fresh to fame, and still trying to understand. Allegedly made a quiet gap because of who he was becoming. There wasn't a fight or tension between them in the usual sense, but there was an invisible line that neither of them ever seemed to cross. Beaumont treated acting like a job, with a schedule, a purpose, and limits. Dow, on the other hand, was still discovering himself. He didn't have the years of life experience, theological background, or emotional armor that Beaumont had built up over time. In many ways, Dow was learning as he went, and like Beaumont, he was still finding his way. Before he became famous, Beaumont said in an interview that Dow and Mathers were like his own children. He said, "It's just like I was bringing up my own 3 youngsters. Beaver and Wally have the same problems they have or had. Sometimes I don't even think I need a script, it all sounds so familiar." Some insiders say that Beaumont and Dow became close during the show's run, while other reports say that they just became friends. While they were polite and professional on set, there may not have been a deep connection between them. Dow was more interested in Jerry Matz, who was younger and had also been a child star. The two of them often lent on each other and had the kind of friendship that only kids in the business can understand. Beaumont, on the other hand, was said to have kept his distance on set, and while he wasn't mean, he also didn't try to make personal connections with the younger cast members because he thought the work would speak for itself. That could have felt cold or even condescending to a teenager like Dow, not because Beaumont didn't like him, but because they were on completely different emotional frequencies. This emotional mismatch lasted throughout the show's run. While Beaumont played Ward Cleaver with gentle authority and kindness, behind the camera he was often quiet, reserved, and focused. Dow, on the other hand, may have been looking for something more, maybe a bit of mentorship or even just a warm relationship with the man who played his father. Years later, Tony Dow would say that he struggled with depression as an adult, saying that the end of his early fame left a hole. He had lived a whole lot of his youth below bright lighting fixtures and strict schedules, and when that lifestyles diminished, the emotional fallout becomes sizable. Dow spoke overtly about his mental fitness, seeking to improve attention about the long-term consequences of baby stardom. Looking back, some have questioned if more emotional guide at some point of those early years might have made a difference, if the set had been a little softer or a bit greater open, if a person like Hugh Beaumont would possibly have provided the kind of personal support that Dow quietly needed. Possibly the emotional fallout of his existence after adolescence repute would have been reduced, while there had been no fights, no dramatic arguments, and no scenes of disagreement most fans predicted. The connection among the two actors, gambling father and son, for nearly 6 years to be closer and fonder. Some reports have also talked about the reality that Beaumont's demeanor on set changed significantly after the tragic twist of fate related to his family. Beaumont reportedly harbored some resentment and deep disappointment on the set of the show, and this disappointment created an emotional and physical distance among him and his co-stars. Through the years, that bodily and emotional distance has been interpreted in exceptional methods. Some have interpreted it as tension or battle, even as others believe it was truly a strict and professional actor keeping his distance from co-stars who he had little and not unusual with. However, it's absolutely viable that Beaumont in demand. Dow's talent, however, determined his young people and growing stardom. Tough to narrate to a few resources additionally claimed that Dow respected Beaumont's professionalism, however can also have determined his emotional partitions difficult to navigate. After departed to Beaver resulted in 1963, Hugh Beaumont failed to chase the subsequent huge position. In fact, inside some short years he stepped far from Hollywood nearly completely. By using the late 1960s he had quietly retired from acting and brought a gradual go out from the general public highlight. He relocated to Minnesota, where he selected a slower, quieter tempo of life. There he centered at the things that had constantly supposed the most to him: his circle of relatives, his faith, and his writing. Far from the enterprise pressures, he determined a few measure of peace in solitude, even as he on occasion regarded in reunions or TV specials. He in no way sought a huge comeback, because for him Hollywood had constantly been a means, not a destination. However, his health did not hold up for long. In 1970 Beaumont suffered a debilitating stroke that affected his mobility and universal power. It was a turning factor. The man, once known for his sturdy, steady presence both on display screen and off, changed into now dealing with the quiet vulnerability of physical decline. He kept largely out of the general public eye in his final years, preferring privateness and time along with his kids and grandchildren. On May 14, 1982, Hugh Beaumont exceeded away from a coronary heart assault. At the same time as traveling his son in Munich, Germany, he turned into 72 years old. True to form, there have been no dramatic headlines or public memorials, only a quiet farewell for a man who had usually kept the arena at fingers. Period. For thousands and thousands of American citizens, he's going to usually be remembered as Ward Clever, the clever, mild father figure who guided his youngsters with patience and principle. But at the back of that picture turned into a man who lived a much more complicated, often hard lifestyles, a person who carried grief, wrestled with inner conflict, and struggled to balance his private values with a completely public career. And when you look lower back at the emotional distance between Hugh Beaumont and some of his co-stars, you'll understand that it wasn't a few dramatic falling out, however a quiet disconnect shaped by means of his age, personality, and the burden of personal struggles that he in no way spoke approximately. However, what do you believe you studied became Hugh Beaumont's coldness towards cast participants, non-public, or turned into it just misunderstood professionalism? Drop your mind within the remarks, and if you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button, subscribe, and switch on publish notifications so that you don't miss what is coming next.